In this video, we're going to build upon what we learned about text in the layers video and really explore our text tool a little bit more. Photoshop offers us some pretty amazing options when it comes to text. You'll notice over here the T in the toolbar is our text tool, and there's a couple different types of text that are available to us. Horizontal, which basically means that whenever we type, the text goes horizontally. The same with vertical type. Horizontal type mask tool and vertical type mask tool are probably tools you're not going to use a lot, so we're not going to look at those in this demo, but primarily most of what you're going to work with is likely the horizontal type tool, and that's what we're going to work with. Another thing that I want to point out here is that Photoshop actually has a dedicated workspace specifically for typography, and you can access it by coming up here to the upper right corner and just selecting the typography workspace, or if you create your own workspace like we showed in one of the early videos, you can add primary type tools that you prefer to work with the most. So we have character, paragraph options, and then we have paragraph and character styles, and then of course layers, channels, and paths. When it comes to working with type, you have a lot of options, and we're going to explore some of these. And the one big difference with Photoshop is that it doesn't support natural text reflow. In other words, Photoshop should not normally be your normal go-to program to work in text on a regular basis. But from a design perspective, you absolutely want to have the most control possible when working with text, and Photoshop provides that for you. So let's take a look at just entering some simple text. You notice that whenever I have the text tool selected, we have a number of options as far as getting things set from the beginning. So you'll notice that the information in the toolbar across the top is very similar to the panel here on the right, except the panel offers a few more options than what you see here on the top. And so let's just look at the panel here on the right here and kind of just go through a quick explanation for what each of these options are. The first, of course, is our font, and you can see the sample of each font that you have installed, and obviously your font selections are going to be different from mine. So you want to choose a font that you want to work with depending on what you're creating type for, whether it's a book cover or header graphic or whatever the case may be. One of my favorite typefaces is one called Trajan, and so I would choose Trajan Pro. Next, you have choices here. Some fonts have multiple versions. Normally there's a regular font. You'll see here we have bold. Sometimes you'll also see italic or bold italic. You'll see thin, heavy, condensed. Different variations depending on the fonts that you have loaded. In this case, we only have a bold and a regular version. Next, this is the font size. These choices will vary quite a lot depending on the resolution of the document that you're working in. Just for demo's sake, we'll choose 60 point. This number here determines how much space there is between lines. Okay, so if you have multiple lines of text, this tells the program how much space you want between each of those lines. And so if you are working with 60 point type like I have selected here, then you probably wouldn't want to have 12 points between the lines because they'd be stacked on top of each other. So you'd want to have at least 60. Sometimes you can go a little bit less if you want to type close together, or you can space it out a lot more, again, depending on how you're planning to use the type. Right underneath that, we have another option, and this option is the amount of space between letters. And I'm going to set this to 0, and just for the sake of demo, I'm going to type in sell my stuff. Now you'll notice that the text is going to the left, and that's because I have the alignment set to center right now. You can see where it says center. If I choose left align, then where I started typing is where the type will anchor. The same is true for right aligning text. Okay, so if I want to change the position, I can just choose the move tool and move it to center. Now another thing that I'm going to do, again, just to demonstrate how some of these settings work, I'm going to hit a hard return so that stuff is on its own line. Okay, so I just clicked and highlighted my text just by left mouse clicking and dragging. And so we have 60 point is the type size. You notice if I choose 72, it makes it bigger. If I switch from auto to like 12 point, you can see what happens. The bottom line is scrunched up into the top line, as opposed to if I choose, say, 60, it's still below the line, but it's a lot closer. 72 gives it a little bit more space. And of course, with any of these numbers, you can type in whatever number that you prefer. Like I could type in 68. With the space between the letters, the default is 0. Now, some typefaces tend to be a little spacey to begin with, and this is one of those. So I could select, say, -25, and you notice how the type moves together, but it's still very readable. I could actually probably even go to -50, and it's very readable. Or if I wanted to space it out a lot, I could go positive 50, I could go positive 100. So you can see where the space between the lines is increasing. And as with the other options, you can type in a random number, so maybe 125 or whatever. This option here, metrics, refers to certain letters whenever they come up next to each other. Like you can see here, the V and the A, you can actually control how those two letters interact, because think about this. If you have an L and a T next to each other, it's going to look normal with those two together, as opposed to having the same amount of space between a V and an A because of how the V and the A are angled together. So in that case, you may want to move those closer. Now, some fonts have that ability built into them. Others don't. And for the ones that don't, you can use metrics to change that and adjust that. And you'll notice that you have metrics or optical. And optical is more of an appearance thing versus metrics, which is purely mathematical. The next option that we have is scaling options for the letters. So let's say that we wanted to increase the height, but not the width of our text. So I could type in 150, and you notice how it stretches out the font. And by the way, and it still remains editable through that process, as opposed to this option, which if I type in 150, makes the text wider. And you'll notice that you also, when you put your mouse over top of the letter itself, it gives you the ability to dynamically scale just by left mouse clicking and dragging your cursor to the left or to the right. This next option gives you the ability to increase the height from the baseline. It's called baseline shift. And where that can come in handy is, like, let's say we make the word my 48 point. And so you'll notice that it's anchored to the baseline, just like the word cell. But let's say that I want it up higher for whatever reason. Let's say that I want to have it aligned with the top of the L, not the bottom. Well, you would do that using this option here, baseline shift. And so if I type in 4, which is 4 points, you notice that it increases. Type in 8, and it's raising the difference even more. You know, I could go to, say, 10 point. And now if we look at the text, you notice that it's closer to aligning with the top than with the bottom. So you can use baseline shift to change the position. Also very similar to where you see like the trademark on a logo or something like that, how you have text. Like let's say sell my stuff was a trademarked phrase. I could type in a TM, make it smaller, and then use baseline shift to reposition it toward the top instead of the bottom. And then of course the last option that we have is changing the color. And you know, we can just simply choose a new color, and now we're red. Okay. Now the options underneath here just give you the ability of changing how your type interacts. Like if you want to make a bold of the font and it doesn't have bold included like this one does, they have what's called faux bold, and basically it creates a fake bold. Same with faux italic. The next option here, if you have some type that you've included and it's upper and lowercase and you want to make it all uppercase, you can do that very easily just by clicking that option. If you have type that is all lowercase or upper and lowercase and you want to create it small caps, you can. Same with superscript, subscript, underline, strike through, so on and so forth. So you have a lot of options there. One more that I want to point out is where right here where it says sharp. This controls how type is represented. Normally sharp is the default and it makes sense. In some cases, depending on the size and the usage of your type, like if you're designing something for the web, you may want to use something that is smoothed or strong a little bit more, especially if it's a small font. So you can do some comparisons on the differences here. And the differences are very subtle. I don't know if you saw how that changed. But with strong versus sharp, you can see where the type is changing, but it's a subtle difference. You especially can notice it whenever you are working with smaller type. Now, the next thing that I want to draw your attention to when working with type is the paragraph tool. And we kind of looked at this a little bit before. This gives you some control over how the type is being laid out. Okay, so whether we're going a line left, a line center, a line right. You can also do first line indents. So if you're typing a paragraph, you could do a first line indent. You can force justify just the top line, just the last line. Right indents you can do. First line indent is different from a full indent. This indents an entire paragraph. This indents just the first line. And so you can see where this is actually adding space here between the paragraphs, like before, adding space after the paragraph. So a lot of the same kind of type tools that you would normally come to expect.